When Daniel Carter signed the papers for apartment 4B, he felt something close to peace. The building wasn't new, but it was solid brick walls, wide balconies, quiet hallways. The kind of place where people nodded politely but didn't ask questions. That's what he wanted. Quiet. Stability. A place where no one knew his past or expected anything from him. On move-in day, Daniel wore a plain grey hoodie and jeans. He carried boxes himself. No movers, no noise, As he unlocked the door, he noticed the woman across the hall watching him. She was white, mid-50s, hair perfectly set, arms crossed tight against her chest. When Daniel looked up and met her eyes, she didn't smile. Instead, she turned and went back inside. Daniel noticed. He always noticed that. First night, everything was calm. The apartment smelled like fresh paint and cardboard. He cooked dinner, unpacked slowly, and slept better than he had in months. The problems started quietly. On the third night, there was a knock at his door. A man from downstairs stood there, lips tight. "Hey," the man said. "You moving furniture late at night?" Daniel checked the time. 8:47 p.m. "No," Daniel replied calmly. "I was reading." The man stared at him for a long second. "Well," someone complained. Daniel nodded. "Okay." The man left without apologizing. The next week, the building manager emailed him about excessive footsteps. Daniel worked from home. He barely moved. A few days later, someone left a note on his door. "Please be considerate. This is a quiet building. No name." Daniel didn't respond. He'd grown up learning this rule early. If you defend yourself too fast, you become the problem. Then came the first official complaint. Noise. 11:32 p.m. Description: heavy movement. Possible guests. Daniel had been asleep. When he emailed the manager explaining this, the reply was short. "We'll monitor the situation." Monitor. That word stayed with him. He started noticing patterns. When he entered the elevator, conversations stopped. People checked their phones harder. A woman clutched her dog closer. Once, he overheard someone whisper, "Is he even supposed to live here?" That night, Daniel opened a folder on his laptop. He labeled it for B documentation. Screenshots, dates, times, emails, notes, not out of anger, auto habit. 2 months later, the HOA meeting was announced. Attendance mandatory for ongoing resident concerns. Daniel almost didn't go, but something told him he needed to be there. The meeting room smelled like coffee and carpet cleaner. About 20 residents sat in folding chairs. Mostly white. Mostly older. Daniel took a seat near the back. When the HOA president, a smiling woman named Lindy, called the meeting to order, her eyes flicked toward Daniel more than once. "Let's address the main issue," Linda said. "Several residents have expressed discomfort." Discomfort? Daniel leaned back. A man raised his hand. "There's been tension," another woman added. "Some people don't feel safe." Daniel waited. Linda cleared her throat. "Apartment 4B has received the highest number of complaints." All eyes turned to him. Daniel stood slowly. "I'd like specifics," he said calmly. "Times, dates, evidence." The room shifted. "Well," Linda said, "it's more about atmosphere." "Atmosphere," Daniel repeated. "Yes, the energy has changed." Daniel nodded once. "So no violations." "Silence," a man muttered. "You don't have to be so aggressive." That word hit harder than the rest. Daniel sat back down. The meeting ended with no resolutions, but the message was clear. They wanted him uncomfortable. They wanted him gone. What they didn't know was that Daniel Carter was a housing rights attorney. And this wasn't his first building. The complaints escalated. False reports, anonymous emails, Scudi being called when Daniel walked in late from grocery shopping. One night, police knocked on his door. Noise complaint? Again. The officer glanced past Daniel into the spotless apartment. "You alone?" the officer asked. "Yes." "All right," the officer said, already backing away. Daniel closed the door slowly. That night, he added police incident numbers to his folder. 3 months later, Daniel received a formal notice. Behavior review pending. Possible lease termination. That's when he decided to stop being quiet. He requested all complaint records under state housing transparency laws. The HOA hesitated. He requested surveillance footage. They stalled. So Daniel sent a single certified letter from his law firm. The building panicked. Emails flew. Meetings were rushed. Linda called him personally. "Daniel," she said, suddenly warm, too. "I think there's been a misunderstanding." Daniel smiled to himself. "Good," he said, "because misunderstandings look bad in court." Within weeks, an investigation began. Patterns emerged. Complaints filed only when Daniel was home. Never when white residents hosted parties. Security logs showing selective enforcement. Emails between HOA members discussing how to encourage a move. Daniel didn't have to expose them publicly. The city did it for him. The building was fined. The HOA president resigned. Mandatory bias training was ordered. And a letter was sent to every resident. Discriminatory conduct has been confirmed. The hallway felt different after that. People avoided Daniel's eyes for new reasons now. Some nodded awkwardly. One woman apologized quietly in the elevator. Daniel listened. He didn't forgive out loud. 6 months later, Daniel stood on his balcony, watching the city lights. He hadn't moved. They'd stopped trying to push him out. Because now they knew something important. He belonged. And this time, he had proof. The building didn't apologize the way Daniel expected it to. There were no community meetings filled with remorse, no collective acknowledgements of what had been done. Instead, there was an awkward quiet that settled into the hallways, a kind of shared understanding no one wanted to name. People became careful. Too careful. Doors closed a little faster when Daniel walked by. Conversations stopped, then restarted only after he passed. Some residents overcorrected, smiling too much, greeting him too loudly, as if friendliness could erase months of hostility. Daniel noticed all of it. He didn't react. That was the part that unsettled them most. One evening, Linda's replacement, a younger man named Greg, knocked on Daniel's door. He held a clipboard, posture stiff with rehearsed professionalism. "Just doing routine check-ins," Greg said, "making sure everyone feels comfortable." Daniel raised an eyebrow. "Everyone?" Greg nodded quickly. "Of course." Daniel stepped aside, letting him see the apartment again. Clean. Quiet. Ordinary. "Nothing's changed," Daniel said. "Except now it's documented." Greg swallowed. "Right, well. If you need anything." Daniel closed the door gently. That night, he added one more note to his folder, not a complaint. Not evidence, just an observation. Silence can be louder than hostility. Weeks passed. The building returned to something resembling normal. Complaints stopped entirely. Security stopped hovering. The police were never called again. But Daniel knew better than to confuse compliance with growth. He started receiving emails from other residents, quiet ones, cautious ones. a single mother on the third floor, an elderly man on the first. They didn't talk about race directly. They talked about patterns, about how rules were enforced differently, about warnings that came faster for some than others, about the feeling of being watched. Daniel listened. He didn't promise anything. He simply told them the truth. Document everything. One night, while sorting through old files, Daniel found a photo of himself from years ago, fresh out of law school, smiling too easily, believing too deeply in systems that claimed neutrality. He stared at it longer than he expected. Back then, he thought fairness was automatic. Now he knew it was negotiated and offended. The city contacted him a month later, asking if he'd consider advising on updated housing compliance protocols. Not as a consultant, as an observer. Daniel agreed on his terms. No press, no titles, just access. In meetings, he spoke less than people expected. He let others reveal themselves. The pauses did more work than arguments ever could. When someone said, "We don't see color here," Daniel asked, "Then how do you explain the data?" There was no answer that didn't implicate someone. Slowly, policy language changed. Complaint procedures were rewritten. Anonymous reports were limited. Oversight was added. None of it dramatic. All of it necessary. Back in the building, Daniel's presence shifted again this time, subtly, almost imperceptibly. People began treating him the way they treated everyone else. Not cautiously, not performatively. Normally. One morning, the woman from across the hall, the one who had watched him move in months ago, held the elevator door for him. "Good morning," she said. Daniel nodded. Morning. That was it. No apology. No explanation. And strangely, Daniel didn't need one. Because belonging wasn't about acceptance. It was about permanence. Later that week, Daniel received a notice slipped under his door, not from management, not from the city. From a neighbor. "Thank you for staying." No name. Daniel folded the paper carefully and placed it in his desk drawer. Not as evidence. As reminder. That evening, he sat on his balcony again. The same place he'd stood months earlier, wondering if peace was something he was allowed to have. The city hummed below. Sirens in the distance. Laughter from a nearby rooftop. Life continuing. Cheer holiday. Daniel thought about all the people who had been pushed out of places like this. Not loudly, not illegally, but persistently. People who left thinking it was their fault. That they hadn't tried hard enough to fit. He thought about how close he'd come to being one of them. And how easily it could have gone differently. His phone buzzed with a message from a colleague. "You made it harder for them to pretend." Daniel smiled faintly. That was always the goal. Not revenge. Not recognition, just resistance. The quiet kind that didn't announce itself but refused to disappear. As air lights in the building flicked on one by one, Daniel felt something unfamiliar settle in his chest. Not relief. Certainty. He wasn't staying to prove a point anymore. He was staying because this was his home. And for the first time since he'd turned the key in apartment for B, the walls around him felt like they understood that. The sense of calm that settled over the building didn't come from reconciliation. It came from resignation. People had learned the limits of what they could do, and more importantly, what they could no longer get away with. Daniel could feel it in the air. Their glances were shorter now, the whispers rarer. When people spoke to him, it was direct, no-coded language, no careful distance. Not because everyone had changed, but because the rules had been rules, when enforced evenly, had a way of exposing who people really were. One afternoon, Daniel received a knock from the maintenance supervisor, a stocky man with oil-stained hands and tired eyes. "Just checking the smoke detectors," he said. Daniel stepped aside without hesitation. As the man worked, he hesitated, then said quietly, "You know, I've been here 12 years. Seen a lot of people move in and out." Daniel waited. "Most don't leave because they want to," the man finished. Daniel nodded. "That's usually how it goes." When the door closed again, Daniel stood still for a moment, absorbing the truth in those words. Survival in places like this often depended on who got tired first. He wasn't tired anymore. At work, his colleagues noticed a shift in him too. He spoke with more certainty, less restraint. He no longer softened his language to make others comfortable. He trusted the weight of his words to land where they needed to. During a meeting, a junior associate asked him, "How do you stay so calm when things get hostile?" Daniel thought for a moment. "Because calm scares people who expect you to break." That answer followed him home. That night, he reviewed the documentation folder one last time. It was thick, now months of proof, patterns clearly visible. He backed it up to multiple drives, encrypted everything, then closed the folder. Not because the fight was over, but because it no longer defined his days. Weeks later, a new family moved into the building, a black couple with a young daughter who loved to run down the hall laughing. No one complained. No notes appeared on doors. No emails were sent. Daniel watched from his doorway one evening as the little girl waved at him. He waved back. That moment mattered more than any apology ever could. The city sent a follow-up report confirming continued compliance. The language was dry, bureaucratic, but the implication was clear. Eyes were still on the building. Accountability had a long memory. On a quiet Sunday morning, Daniel ran into Lindy, the former HOA president, outside a nearby cafe. She looked startled when she saw him. "Daniel," she said stiffly. "Linda." An awkward pause hung between them. "I hope things are better now," she said. "They are," Daniel replied. "For everyone." She nodded, unsure what to say, then walked away. Daniel didn't feel victory. He felt closure. Later that day, as he sorted mail, he found a flyer slipped under his door. A tenant meeting. New leadership. Open forum. At the bottom, handwritten in pen. "Your voice is welcome." Daniel stared at it for a long time. Then he placed it on the counter. He hadn't planned to become a reference point. He hadn't wanted to be an example. But examples were powerful, precisely because they were ordinary. He attended the meeting. He didn't speak much. When he did, it was measured, factual, grounded in experience. Others spoke too, some hesitantly, some with long-held frustration finally given space. The room listened. Walking back to his apartment that night, Daniel realized something fundamental had shifted. The building hadn't become cleaner, it had become fairer. Too. And fairness, he knew, was the foundation everything else rested on. As he unlocked the door to apartment for B, the same door that once symbolized isolation now felt solid, permanent. A quiet declaration. He wasn't tolerated. He wasn't accommodated. He was simply there. And no one could take that away from him.